Hey guys, it's Miss Kellogg back with your 7.3, the Early Renaissance art read-along. During the 15th century, a new era in human thought, culture, and artistic expression emerged in Western Europe. Because it was such a departure from a preceding Middle Ages, this period became known as the Renaissance, or Rebirth. During the Renaissance, people rediscovered the classical art and philosophy of ancient Greece and Rome. Like always, here's where you can get your student guide. Go to the next module. As you read through the lesson, use your student guide. The Renaissance, a look back. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, great changes took place in the way the inhabitants of Western Europe viewed their world. The Renaissance began in Italy around AD 1400. Artists and philosophers looked beyond more recent history and turned to ancient times, the golden age of classical and Hellenistic Greek civilization, and the glories of the Roman Empire for inspiration and insight. Despite the focus on the past, the Renaissance was a time of astounding advancements in human knowledge. With newfound confidence in their potential, humans examined the natural world and their role in it, a way of thinking that we call humanism. Explorers navigated the globe, bringing back riches and reports of vastly different cultures. The printing press extended the flow of learning and information beyond the realm of cloistered monks. City-states flourished with the increase in trade, giving rise a new privileged class that was neither nobility nor clergy. These wealthy families could afford to expand their cultural horizons thanks to the availability of the books, and many became patrons of the arts. Painters, sculptors, and architects, no longer reliant solely on the church for commissions, would benefit from this new source of funding and the artistic freedom it provided. One of the greatest artists of the early Renaissance was the Italian Domenico di Beto Bartini, known as Donatello, who lived from 1386 to 1466. When he was young, Donatello, apprenticed under a master sculptor, he went on to become a master in his own right and opened a workshop in Florence, an important cultural center where many great artists gathered during this period. Donatello was one of the great humanist thinkers of the early Renaissance. How did he express humanism in his sculptures? He captured the beauty of the human form and nuances of human expression through study of classical sculpture and of the natural world. He portrayed these humanistic, naturalist, and realistic ideas equally, whether creating a nude youth or an aged worn figure. Early Renaissance convention in Donatello's David. David's a biblical subject, a brave young man who killed a fierce giant named Goliath with a sling. An important aspect of Donatello's David is this realistic and natural way the youth is represented, shown in a relaxed contrapposto pose seen in classical sculpture. David rests his left hand, which holds the stone that killed Goliath, on his hip, and his left leg bent over Goliath's severed head. He also wears a laurel wreath over his hat, leg coverings with recall classical Greek and Roman sculptures. Commissioned by the Medici family, great patrons of the Renaissance art in Florence, David was the first freestanding nude sculpture since antiquity. During medieval times, sculptures were attached to architectural supports, which as the jabs lining cathedral portals. Medieval sculptures considered the nude body immoral and depicted it in the scenes telling of man's sinfulness. Renaissance artists saw the human body as created in God's likeness, not something to be ashamed of. How does the depiction of the nudes fit with your beliefs? Art of the early Renaissance. Botticelli. Sandra Botticelli is another important artist of the early Renaissance who worked in Florence. He lived from 1444 to 1510 and was the first artist of his age to make large-scale paintings with classical mythological figures as the subject. This was a fundamental shift away from the art of the Middle Ages, which almost always showed Christian themes. During the Renaissance, the church was still a major patron that commissioned religious artworks, but private patrons requested other subjects, including classical ones. Conventions in Botticelli. Botticelli's painting figures full of grace and beauty. He outlined the slender figures with elegant lines and added shading to give them a sense of form. The flowing lines and fine patterns form a delicate visual rhythm. Lorenzo de' Medici commissioned Botticelli to paint Primavera, which means spring in Italian. It depicts a scene of classical mythology with Venus, the Roman god of beauty and love, at the center. Not everyone agrees on the identify of the figurine of Primavera or the meaning of the painting. Mary believed that Venus symbolized the coming of spring. For others, the painting symbolizes marriage. Still others believe that the painting symbolizes Christian love with Venus, reminding them of the Virgin Mary. You can explore more of the Primavera here. Art of the early Renaissance. Throughout history, artists of different periods and civilizations have made art with the intention of evoking either an emotional response from viewers or an intellectual response. Medieval artists were more concerned with an emotional connection viewers made with the religious message to their artworks, and towards order and reason. Renaissance artists leaned more towards order and reason. How do you weigh in on this topic? Comparing Primavera with Dolceolio's Masto altarpiece allows us to see an artistic developments that took place between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Explore Renaissance and the medieval activity on the next screen. Duccio used overlapping and shading to illustrate space and form. He placed distant objects higher to show recession, but Botticelli's painting reveals more sophistication. Figures occupy realistic space and don't appear squashed against the picture plane. Figures have a greater sense of form due to a more natural use of shading, and they reside in an earthly setting that has depth rather than a flat gold background. Art of the early Renaissance. The technique of tempera. To make Primavera, Botticelli used egg tempera, a type of paint popular with artists during the medieval and early Renaissance times. Artists made tempera by mixing ground mineral pigment with egg yolk. Artists can apply it to the wood panel or canvas, visible in the originals, but not necessarily in photograph reproductions. Artists made with tempera paint have a soft velvety sheen because the tempera dries quickly. Cracking and flaking of the paint is common. Pier Venucci, better known as Perugino, lived from 1446 to 1524. The Pope called Perugino to Rome to paint Christ delivering the keys of the kingdom to St. Peter on the walls of the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican. Perugino used the fresco technique of applying paint directly to wet plaster spread onto the wall. This work is based on the story for the New Testament in which Jesus presents silver and gold keys to his disciple Peter, giving him the authority to allow others into heaven. St. Peter kneels before Jesus and is surrounded by the other disciples. Flanking the temple in the distance are arches that Perugino based on the triumphal arch of the Emperor Constantine, who made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire and built a basilica over the site of St. Peter's tomb in Rome. Perugino and other Renaissance artists used the contrasting areas of light and dark to model figures, giving them a sense of having real bones and muscle. Perugino's figures have accurate yet idealized anatomy and proportion. They have delicate facial features and long flowing hair, and the folds of their clothing reveal the body underneath. Perhaps the one thing that best characterizes Perugino's paintings is the sense of rational ordered space without distracting details. To depict depth realistically in a two-dimensional painting, he used the Renaissance mathematical system called one-point perspective. The system uses a horizon line and a vanishing point, or orthogonal lines. To see how one uses this mathematical system, click here. And that's all I have for this. I'll see you guys in the next video.